behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Those of you who missed our earlier episode today, Fatal Distractions, Drug Substance Abuse and the Media, with Neeraj Kumar and Jyotsna Mohan Bhargava in conversation with Maya Mirchandani, you can catch this on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, and on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest. Our next session of the day is Cricket, the Spirit of the Game. Rajdeep Sardesai and Gideon Haigh in conversation with Keshava Guha. India and Australia are both cricket-obsessed nations that share an all-consuming love for the sport of sports. Two brilliant experts bring the changing nature of cricket to life in an engrossing conversation. Author and news anchor Rajdeep Sardesai, in his book, Democracy's 11, The Great Indian Cricket Story, masterfully narrates the story of cricket in a post-colonial era through the lives of 11 multi-dimensional cricketers. Eminent sports journalist Gideon Haigh has authored Crossing the Line, How Australian Cricket Lost Its Way, On Warren and the Cricket War. In conversation with author Keshava Guha, they discuss the spirit of the game and its evolving nature, including its digital avatar in the COVID age, and the change from Test cricket to the multi-billion-dollar enterprise of the Indian Premier League. Rajdeep Sardesai is a senior journalist, author, and TV news presenter. He's currently the consulting editor and lead news anchor of the India Today group. His latest book is 2019, How Modi Won India. His previous books include 2014, The Election That Changed India, and Democracy's 11, The Great Story of Indian Cricket. Gideon Haigh has contributed to more than 100 newspapers and magazines and published 35 books about cricket, business, social affairs, and true crime. His latest book, This Is How I Will Strangle You, is a study of incest. Keshava Guha is a writer and editor. His novel Accidental Magic is set in Boston in the early 2000s in a community of adult Harry Potter obsessives. He is the fiction editor at Juggernaut Books in New Delhi. His literary and political journalism has appeared in a range of Indian and international publications. Do remember that all our sessions that have been broadcast till now are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our Facebook and YouTube channels. And of course, if we drop off, hang in there. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, cricket, the spirit of the game, Rajdeep Sardesai and Gideon Haigh in conversation with Keshava Guha. Rajdeep, Gideon, Keshava, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjoy. Thank you to the whole team at JLF and JLF Brave New World. So it's really a treat to be here talking with Rajdeep and Gideon about something that we all love. This is a kind of a sequel to a conversation that we had along with Shashi Tharoor at Jaipur back in January. And of course, we're talking about the same subject, but in very different circumstances. And we'll come to all of that. But I wanted to start with where we are right now, or where we're going to be in a week's time when an Indian team leaves to tour Australia. You know, of course, we've got two Indians and one Australian here in this conversation. And Australia has historically been probably the most difficult place for Asian teams to tour, certainly for India to tour. If you look at it historically, India only ever really can compete in Australia when we get lucky in some way. You know, in the 70s and 80s, you had Australian teams weakened by the Packer revolution. More recently, in 2003, Australia were missing Warren and McGrath. More recently still, in circumstances that Gideon wrote about in his recent book, Crossing the Line, India toured in 2018 with Australia missing their two best batsmen, Steve Smith and David Warner. Against a full-strength Australian team, Indian tours of Australia usually end in tears. But this time, we're hoping it's going to be different. And I think given that Australia were missing Smith and Warner last time, cricket fans sort of hope that this will be, in a way, there's an official Test Championship, but this could almost be the unofficial World Test Championship. So Gideon, I wanted to start with you. This is a tour happening in very unusual circumstances. But what are you looking forward to? How do you think it's going to go? What are your thoughts on the upcoming tour?
I'm incredibly relieved that it's going ahead, Keshava. It's been touch and go at times, right up until the 11th hour with quarantine issues between the various states. It was by no means certain that the tour was even going to happen 10 days ago. And it's exactly what the Australian game needs at the moment after a barren winter, a winter free, not entirely free of sport, but certainly free of sports participation. And I mean, I'm speaking from Melbourne, and Melbourne's had borne the brunt of COVID in Australia. We've had more or less 6 months of lockdown, and it was there was a period there where it looked like we might lose the Boxing Day Test, which of course was anathema to local cricket fans. We'd already lost the AFL Grand Final. We've just had the Melbourne Cup, which is the premium horse race of the calendar, being staged in front of empty stands. If we'd lost Boxing Day as well, I would have put all blunt instruments out of reach. I would have felt absolutely destitute. So, in a sense, the triumph is getting it started at all. And of course, the prospect of India, I think these days, is almost more exciting for me than England being here, because England have found it even tougher to win in Australia than India historically. And India, certainly in their most recent incarnation under Kohli, have made a point of being a great on-the-road team and afraid of no challenges, prepared to embrace things like the DRS, which previous Indian teams have been reluctant to enfold, and prepared to go toe-to-toe with their competitors, both with bat and with manner. So it's a fantastic opportunity for both sides, and I think something the public's really going to rally around this summer, with all the difficulties and awkwardnesses of the last 9 months. It's hopefully they're going to fade away. I mean, isn't it incredible, Keshava, that we had this conversation in January? It feels like an eternity ago. It feels like another world, but it's wonderful to get back together, even vicariously via technology.
And in this tour, India's cricketers are going to be playing in front of crowds, right? Because in the IPL, they've been playing in front of empty stadiums. And here there are going to be reduced crowds, but there are going to be crowds.
Mm.
But something else.
They are. It's actually been fascinating to watch the teams become adjusted to playing in front of crowds. I mean, I watch the IPL highlights most days, and I watch most games. I don't know what it seems like to the players, but even for me, from this distance, it seems incredibly artificial. And then you have this phenomenon of the players gathering together at the end of the day's play to interview one another, and then to participate in these strange kind of synthetic press conferences, which are almost as sterile as the environment in which they're accommodated. It might be a bit of a bracing reintroduction to reality, might it, to actually play in front of a live audience?
Yeah. I want to come back to what's going to happen on the field. But Rajdeep, Gideon said something very interesting, which is that he actually looks forward to a tour by India even more than a tour by England. And that really tells you about how things have changed. If you go back, your father, Rajdeep, actually toured Australia, in 67, 68 with an Indian team. And in those days, for India, there was no hope of winning in Australia. For Australia, India was not a touring team that was taken seriously. So do you think that for Indian fans also now, actually Australia has replaced Pakistan, whom we don't really play anymore, or England as our number one rival, the people that we most look forward to playing against?
First of all, thanks very much, Keshava. Gideon, lovely to see both of you, as well as thank you to JLF. But look, I think let's put it in some context of what you said. My father went in 67, 68 to Australia. That was the first tour to Australia in 20 years. The previous tour was 47, 48. I think it was Bradman's last tour at home, last series at home. India got thrashed then, and India got thrashed in 67, 68 as well. But there was a 20-year gap. For 20 years, an entire generation of Indian cricketers never got to tour Australia. I don't think Polly Umbriga, for example, or Vijay Manjrekar, the two great cricketers of the 1950s, two of the many great cricketers that India threw up in the 50s, Subhash Gupte, never went to Australia, never toured never had the experience of a full tour to Australia. Now, the two greatest cricketers when I was growing up, Australian cricketers, Greg Chappell and Dennis Lillee, never came to India. There was never a tour, either because there was one tour in the late 70s, but they didn't come because they were part of Packer. But either way, it appeared that India was certainly not a priority for them or indeed the Australian Cricket Board. And look at how things have changed. The Australian Cricket Board, from all indications, and Gideon can correct me, was desperate to have this tour, not just because you wanted to showcase cricket in COVID times, but also you needed the revenues. You know, at the end of the day, India is the cash cow. I mean, this is what a board official told me, that the Australian cricketers struck a deal by which they said, look, okay, you don't want to hold the T20 World Cup in Australia, that's okay, but please, we need an Indian team there. We need a full test series, even if we don't have a T20 World Cup. In return, we'll make sure our cricketers are available for the IPL. That's how things have changed. I mean, the Australians have truly embraced the idea of India. Every time I see the Australians play in the IPL, and then I go back to the 70s and wonder, why did the great Australian cricketers of that generation, Rodney Marsh, Greg Chappell, Dennis Lillee, never come to India? You know, it just shows how much India is now the superpower of cricket. I think it says more about where India is in the cricketing fraternity, and also suggests that maybe through time, all these bridges that were built or the walls that were built have slowly been dismantled. So it's great. I mean, I'm looking forward to this. It's a great way to spend winter, getting up early in the morning and watching India and Australia play at 6 a.m. Indian Standard Time.
Well, actually, Rajiv, I want to take that up. It's a fascinating story that you tell, and I think some people won't be aware of some of this history, right? But so the transformation, and I dated really 1998, Australia toured India. It was their first full tour in 11 years, since the 86
That's right.
And they were the best team in the world. They'd replaced the West Indies, and India beat them. And the first two tests, India won very convincingly, and Tendulkar dominating one and all of that. And after that, Australia have come every 3 or 4 years. We've gone every 3 or 4 years. We've started to do well there. But I guess my question to you would be a bit of a chicken and egg. But is it more a story about cricket or more a story about India's rise in terms of economic growth? I mean, put another way, do we credit Sachin Tendulkar or do we credit Narasimha Rao?
Good question, to which the answer is let's credit both.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I think with liberalization, with the opening up of the market, India discovered, in a way, cricket's commercial potential. And I think the 1996 World Cup particularly was a huge turning point, because with the kind of television coverage and the mega deals that were struck, I've often said Sachin Tendulkar was the first superstar in the age of satellite TV. So, satellite TV was sort of exploding. You needed someone who was your hero for the satellite TV age. There was Tendulkar. Cricket, as a result, explodes in India in terms of the fact that you realize the commercial potential of it. Then, over time, you globalize it. So first, you sort of liberalize the economy, and therefore cricket sort of becomes a commercial entity within India. And then you recognize its global potential about 10 years later with the IPL coming into place. And that's when I think the Australians also realize that, look, we should be traveling more to India, because that's where, that's where we can truly make the money. I mean, let's be clear, it's Mammon at the end of the day which is driving this. And even in the 90s, I think Australian cricketers would have been reluctant at times to come to India. But by 2007-8, all the barriers had been broken. And now every Australian cricketer sort of is part of some IPL franchise or the other, which is not true of Indian cricketers being part of any of the Big Bash franchises. So I think India, you're absolutely right. I think the opening up of the economy, the freeing up of the skies with satellite television, and then the emergence of global superstars like Sachin Tendulkar, and then the discovery of the IPL and T20 cricket, all very happily coincided over, say, 15 years between 93 and 2008.
I mean, now normally I'm the first person to draw attention to the role of the Exchequer in the influences on cricket. But I think I should say a word here for the cricket. The cricket's been excellent between these two countries. They play a kind of a fascinating, contrasting and complementary style. And of course, when I was growing up, that period that you kind of mentioned, when India very seldom toured Australia and Australia very seldom toured India, there was a scarcity value about this tour. The tours were fascinating. They were exotic because they happened so rarely. But now we have a different kind of context. Through constant competition, the more you compete, the more context you generate, the more kind of individual rivalries you build up, the more story you build. And the richer the story, the richer the cricket. I mean, it is amazing that we only had India here 2 years ago, and we had 4 very good test matches, and now we're having them again, but we're still hungry for it. And it's not only for the money. We want to see Kohli again. We want to see Bumrah again. We want to see Sharma. We want to see Shami. We know these names. And of course, the international cricket fan these days is far, far better informed about cricket in other countries than they were in our generation growing up. So to see these names, to see these figures is somehow that much more compelling. They fit into a pre-existing narrative. So sure, the money's important. It's like Willie Sutton said when he was asked about, why did he rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Yeah. Sure, we love going to India because it's the biggest market in the world. It's the most compelling market in the world. It's the most cricket-centric market in the world. But we go there. We also go there because we're cricket fans. We love the fact that Indians love cricket and that they love Australian cricketers as well.
Can I just add to what Gideon said, Keshava? Because I think the other big distinction, and this stems from what he said, is that Indians who went to Australia in the 60s, 70s, even 80s, and dare I say 90s, were intimidated by the idea of going to Australia. Yeah. The sheer size of the ground. I remember my father telling me the first thing that struck him when they went to Australia was the size of the grounds. And I think, the bouncy pitches, these reports of these, Australian fast bowlers, the Thompsons of the 70s. I think Indian cricketers went to Australia with a defeatist mindset. With the idea, can we at least draw a test match? And I think that started changing in this century. In the early part of the 2000s, the sort of Ganguly generation, I think, changed that defeatist mindset, brought in a bit of self-belief. And now with the Kohli generation, they will look the Australians in the eye. They are no longer intimidated by the Australians. And I think that appeals to the Australian mindset as well. That here, much like the West Indies in the 70s and 80s, why did Australian crowds love the West Indies so much? You had the West Indies coming to Australia every couple of years till the Australians got tired of being beaten every time by the West Indians, I think. But for a long time, the West Indians intimidated, in a way, the Australians, and they liked the idea of a team that was looking the Australians in the eye. I think India does that, and that's one of the changes I think that's taken place. This generation of the Kohli generation will meet fire with fire. And I think that is extremely appealing.
I think that's a very perceptive point, Rajdeep, that in some ways India has replaced the West Indies in Australia. Right. The West Indies used to come here all the time in the 80s and 90s. They were England, of course, the traditional benchmark, the traditional opponents. We valued the Ashes enormously. That was kind of a paramount. But for sheer excitement, those West Indies teams of the 70s, 80s and 90s were our benchmark. As the West Indies receded, India, I think, has taken up a good deal of that slack.
Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely true what Rajdeep says, and I'm sure Rajdeep, you must have grown up on these stories. I mean, you said that we might look to draw a test, but really we were clutching at individual achievements, right? Hazare's in 100 in each innings, or Prasanna taking 46 wickets in 8 tests in Australia and New Zealand, or even Tiger Pataudi getting 2 attractive 50s in a test match that India lost. These are the kinds of things that were talked about for decades later in India. And now we're actually saying, we're going there to try to win a test series, which we did last time, right? And so Gideon, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, what you're sort of looking forward to on the field. One thing about India and the West Indies is one of the things it took was for India to start developing fast bowlers. Because the teams that have done well in Australia, whether it's the West Indies in the 80s, whether it's South Africa in the last 10 or 12 years when you had Steyn or later Rabada, they've been teams with good fast bowlers. In England, there's an obsession with having bowlers who are quick enough to do well in Australia. I mean, they pick people in England thinking that how will he do in Australia 18 months from now? And, here it's sort of, for me, the battle between a Bumrah, Shami, Ishant if he's fit, and Hazelwood, Cummins, Stark. That seems like it's extraordinary that India can go to Australia. We're actually talking about could our pace attack be as good as the Australians?
Yes, and they outbowled Australia here 2 years ago. I mean, I thought that was a potential Australian trump card. You had Stark and Hazelwood and Cummins in combination, who had disposed peremptorily of England in the previous summer, but they were comfortably outbowled by that trio you mentioned. And the spinners, with which historically India has been associated, performed a kind of a holding operation for Kohli. I think Kohli almost sometimes doesn't rate spin, perhaps because he finds it so easy to play. He's got a sort of a batsman's understanding of captaincy, and the things that kind of discomfort him, he assumes, not without foundation, discomfort other batsmen. And he is comfortably the most compelling personality around. Just the sheer pleasure of writing about Kohli day to day in 2018-19 was worth getting up for. There's been very few touring captains of Australia who have been just so electrifying simply by walking on the field. I'll be interested to feel whether it's different this summer, because we will, to some degree, for biosecurity reasons, be insulated from the players. We probably won't be going to face-to-face press conferences. We'll probably see them all on Zoom. We probably won't get very close to the players at all. I'll be interested to see whether his charisma is quite so radioactive as it was here 2 years ago. But there's definitely, not only does he take his troops with him, but he makes them feel like a combination of 12 rather than 11. He is kind of an extra man in his own body of cricketers.
I think both of you make great points, both on Kohli and the fast bowling factor. And again, it comes back to this notion of intimidation. Let me be very clear. I mean, watching Kohli during the IPL, he's still the fact that there are no crowds haven't mattered to him. He's been still in your face, aggressive. His form was not always the greatest. Despite that, you can clearly see that the body language is of someone fully involved in the game. So I don't expect Kohli to take a step back simply because we are in a biosecurity atmosphere. And that's the good news. And the other news, as Keshava put it, is the emergence of India as a fast bowlers nation. I mean, all these romantic stories were spun literally around our spinners in the 60s and 70s, and they were terrific bowlers. But, spin doesn't intimidate quite like fast bowling does. It doesn't sort of excite you in the way that fast bowling can. The idea of a fast bowler looking at a batsman in the eye after having bowled a bouncer at him. There's something about it that sort of brings out the real raw energy of cricket. In a way that a spin bowler, much more about craft and about the mind. Fast bowling is much more about the muscle. And to think that Indian cricketers, who were traditionally seen as timid and inferior in some way, and I think the Australians also saw the sort of prototype of an Indian cricketer as being relatively timid. The idea that you now have the Bumrahs and the Shamis, I think has dramatically changed the equation. I think that's an important element of making Indian cricket more attractive. The fact that we now have fast bowlers who can fight fire with fire makes a huge difference, I think, to the game. And Kohli, you're right. I think Kohli also backs fast bowlers more than he would probably a spinner. And I'll tell you, Ravi Shastri, who is a cricketer from a previous age, told me that he believes you can only really win in Australia when you have fast bowlers. You could never really take on the Australians in the 70s and 80s, even though we had great batsmen, because we didn't have the bowling to bowl the Australians out twice on Australian wickets. Now we can. And I think that has changed for India, the rules of the game overseas. That's why we are now tigers abroad, where once we were lambs.
I'll say one other quality that I felt was distinctive about the last Indian team to tour Australia was its athleticism. Historically, we have associated Indian cricketers with very high levels of skill, but they aren't necessarily athletes at the same time. Of course, Kohli is the prototypical modern athlete. He's absolutely dedicated body and soul to his craft and to maximising his physical potential. Dhoni was like that too, but I don't think Dhoni had the same degree of expectation that Kohli does of his contemporaries. He sets a standard that he expects others to live up to.
Can I share an anecdote on this, which in a sense typifies how times have changed? 67, 68, my father, who was rather rotund by then, wasn't exactly the most athletic fielder that you had. Played a test match at Adelaide. And Adelaide has long straight boundaries.
Yes.
And I think Doug Walters or someone hit a straight drive. And as the ball was approaching the boundary, they were about to take a fifth run when my father kicked the ball over the boundary, so that they only took four. So that it was a boundary. It was typical Indian street smart way of approaching the game, but also showed the lack of athleticism. It's a story that Bishan Bedi tells me rolling over, but that's Indian cricket of the time. We never dived. The idea of Indian cricketers diving, the idea of Indian cricketers taking these spectacular catches in the deep. We had very good forward short leg fielders and slip fielders, but not really in the outfield. And I think that's, again, a huge change that's taken place. I think as the game professionalized, being an athlete became an important element. I have no doubt that the cricketers of 60s and 70s, if they were offered far more incentives to play the game than they are today, were offered far more incentives then as they are today, they would have been fit. But at that time, there was an amateurism, I think, about Indian sport. And athleticism was, as a result, a casualty of that amateur spirit.
I think Gideon's point about Dhoni and Kohli is a very interesting one. They are both very successful captains, but they could not be more contrasting in terms of their style or their personality. And actually, Kohli made his captaincy debut in Australia in 2014-15 when Dhoni sort of retired mid-series. And after that series, he said something very interesting. India lost 2-0. And he said, I've told our fast bowlers, who were then Shami, not Bumrah yet, but Shami, Ishant, Umesh, look at Hazelwood. He bowls 6 good balls and over. You guys bowl 1 ball on the pads. And what was very interesting is Kohli said, the reason for this is that he's not more skilled than you. He's fitter than you. And it's with fitness that you'll get that consistency. And he pushed particularly Shami, Ishant, later Bumrah to match his own fitness levels. Dhoni sort of said, you're a grown-up, take care of yourself. I'll set a standard, but I won't sort of force you to do the same. Now, Rajdeep, you're one of the few people who spent time with both of these guys in writing your book. You've studied them, their different styles. So, what the time you spent with them, what light did that shed on them as people, as captains?
It is fascinating because I think Kohli, exemplifies the complete professionalization of an elite athlete. So when I asked him the story on fitness, he was not measuring his fitness against fellow cricketers. He said, I look at Novak Djokovic. I'm looking at a Grand Slam champion and saying, what can I do to become a sort of Grand Slam champion in the world of cricket? Now, I don't think Dhoni's worldview extended there. Dhoni, in a sense, is a bit of a connect with the past era of the most street smart cricketer. I think in Ranchi, while he played the game hard, was naturally a sort of muscular young man. I don't think he worked at fitness as part of his daily regimen. So I think Dhoni represents to that, to some extent, a connect with the amateur age of the 70s and 80s, played the game for a laugh. And in fact, when I asked Dhoni, what will you do post-cricket? He said, I'll have nothing to do with the game. I want to enjoy life. I don't think Kohli is about that. Kohli is about, I want to make sure that this is the greatest ever Indian team. This will be recognized 30 years later as the greatest Indian team there ever was. I want to be seen as a batsman who took fitness to another level. And as his fitness trainer told me, now you will have to look at Indian cricket as before Kohli and after Kohli, purely in terms of fitness. I don't think Dhoni saw cricket in those terms. Dhoni was very much part of someone who'd come through a small town boy who was just happy that he was there on this big stage and enjoyed every moment of it. Thereby was able to sort of take in the pressure also rather well, because there was a calmness to him. He was just happy at being where he was. While for Dhoni, while for Kohli, I think he carries this sort of new Indian metropolitan aggression. The sort of suburban aggression of Delhi. This new Vikas Puri aggression. I'm going to make it at all costs. And I think there's a difference in that. And I think that shows in their captaincy, where Dhoni is much more relaxed. Kohli is much more aggressive and in your face. He won't give an inch on a cricket field, Kohli. Not an inch to anyone. It's his strength and his weakness. I think he gets at times too involved in the game. So he's not able to step back, which is why I think sometimes his captaincy, his over-aggression can actually be a bit of a liability for an Indian team. But it's lovely to watch. It's fascinating. And as a batsman, absolute killer on the ground. I mean, there's the story again that he scored, I think, a double century in the humid heat of Mumbai 3 or 4 years ago against England, and then allowed himself after weeks to have a proper meal of a sort of burger, but remove the bread because, that was seen as something that might sort of not be part of his fitness regimen. I can see Dhoni after scoring 100 having butter chicken. I can't see Kohli doing that.
Steve Smith awards himself a huge block of chocolate when he gets a big score. I certainly can't see Kohli doing that.
Yeah.
No, he might, but he might just have a spoon. He won't have a full chocolate ice cream.
Well,
It'll be interesting to see what the impact on Kohli is of becoming a father.
yeah.
Become a father in January, and that's changed more than a few players in my experience. They always said that Merv Hughes was never quite the same cricketer after he became a father, or a different kind of cricketer. He lost some of that abrasive edge. He found it difficult to access that part of himself. I don't think that will happen to Kohli, but certainly that will introduce him to worlds that he has never previously fathomed. That's what fatherhood's all about.
He seems to smile a lot more. I see Virat seems to smile a lot more. He's wonderful in interviews. I think he is a student of the game.
Yes.
As Dhoni is. Maybe both of them perhaps are not as connected to the history of the game. And I think that's one thing that's often missing in contemporary cricketers. I don't know whether Dhoni knows that Vijay Hazare, for example, as Keshava mentioned, scored a century in each innings at Adelaide. But I think he is very respectful of the game and its traditions, in particular Test cricket. And that's the great part. Here is a cricketer, 3-in-1 cricketer, T20, ODIs, Test, but believes that Test cricket is the ultimate test. And I think, therefore, is a great role model for cricketers of the future, because too many young Indian cricketers are coming in, I think, at times believing that T20 is where I need to make a mark. And I think Kohli still represents that sort of respect for Test cricket, which is delightful in a way, particularly for romantics like us.
It's a hunger for greatness.
That's right.
And while T20 can offer you spectacle and excitement, it's not, I think, quite a big enough canvas for genuine greatness. Most of the players who've been really accomplished at T20 have been great players when they arrived. I've yet to see a case of a player who's become great through T20 alone.
That's fascinating because, I think somewhere, and Keshava, maybe we need to look at that, while all the focus has been on the IPL, what troubles me about COVID times is that there is no talk of how are we going to revive domestic cricket. We don't know whether we're going to have a Ranji Trophy season this year or all the matches. And that worries me, that while the focus is on IPL and yes, going to Australia, what about building the next generation of cricketers through domestic cricket? So I think that's going to be a huge challenge, franchise cricket, as it keeps growing. We might have another IPL in a few months, we're told, in March. So the excessive focus on franchise cricket and T20 at the cost of longer format is something that we're going to have to struggle to live with, I guess.
That actually takes me to what I wanted to talk about next, which is that, historians have been talking about past pandemics, world wars, similar events. And one of the things that they say is that they tend to accelerate existing trends rather than sort of create new ones. And even before COVID-19, the IPL was going from strength to strength every year. And in every sense, the IPL is a huge moneymaker for the owners, right? People think that people want to own IPL teams for glamour and spectacle. No, they make real profits, serious money from the IPL. And Test cricket outside of India, Australia, England was struggling. And if you think about what's happening to businesses, stronger getting stronger, the weaker getting weaker in sort of industry after industry. In other sports, the English Premier League might do well, but smaller leagues in smaller European countries or South America, clubs are struggling to survive. So I think it's possible that the long-term trend of the acceleration of IPL, the decline of Test cricket might actually get worse with this. I mean, Gideon, is that how you see it?
Yes, I do. And but one of the things that it's done most clearly, COVID-19, is just reveal what a mockery the World Test Championship is.
Yeah.
There's only ever really 3 teams in it, and now, lo and behold, there are 3 teams in it. And Bangladesh have played 2 Test matches in the relevant span. They were never competitive. They're actually not a bad team when they get the opportunity to play, but they're just not in the running. You can't have a championship where teams play a different number of games. It might be the case that England gets into the final just simply because they've played like 15 Test matches rather than 10 Test matches. That's just absurd. So it was always an anachronism, and the scoring system was ridiculous. And it was a half-hearted effort that now looks like a quarter-hearted effort as a result of what's transpired over the last year.
And conversely,
but the imperative, of course, the commercial imperative was to get India into the final. So in that respect, it's fulfilled its design.
You know, it's also difficult, Keshava, because of the sheer volume of monies involved in the IPL at the moment, to sort of believe that we can actually sort of put Test cricket on the front foot and somewhere sort of look at IPL as an add-on. The fact is, the IPL has over time become the main course, and you know, that is for a younger cricketer. I'll give you the example of this fascinating story of this cricketer T. Natarajan, you know, who's playing for the Hyderabad Sunrisers. Parents owned a little chicken shop, roadside chicken shop in a village in Tamil Nadu. Now he's become a specialist death bowler in the IPL with his Yorkers, and you know, he can have a full cricket career, probably traveling eventually to other franchises as a specialist death bowler, and thereby will inspire probably other kids to follow his path. Where 10, 20 years ago, the path they would follow was either the Dhoni path of, you know, lifting the World Cup and sort of being, you know, taking India to #1 in Test play as a Test playing nation, or the Kohli part, which is to become, you know, the #1 Test batsman in the world. So you've got new heroes being created, new role models being created, and it's difficult to then resist the temptation for others coming in from the smaller towns. So I think it's going to be more and more difficult to achieve that right balance. And that's the real struggle that BCCI and other cricket boards will have. And I really worry about the BCCI in that regard as well at times. That, you know, will they eventually end up, I mean, they've already to some extent diluted Ranji Trophy cricket. You know, they need to do much more for Ranji Trophy cricket. We have a strong junior system in India, under 15, under 17, under 19, but we destroyed university cricket. And now my worry is at some stage, we aren't doing enough for Ranji Trophy cricket as well. We need to make a more exciting format for our first-class game in this country to encourage people to sort of value winning the Ranji Trophy for Bombay, as my father's generation did, as much as sort of winning the IPL for the Mumbai Indians.
The playing resources of India, though, to an Australian just seem completely staggering. The number of first-class teams that you have to draw on. When we have 6 states, and when we created the Big Bash League and extended it to 8 franchises, we diluted the strength of our domestic T20. India consolidates its strengths. It gets 8 franchises out of 30-odd first-class teams. So the quality of the domestic T20 that India is playing is outstanding. I find this IPL particularly compelling, and ours is a rather washed out, rather tepid version of the saying. And we used to flatter ourselves that the BBL was a direct competitor to the IPL, but I don't think that's the case anymore.
And I'm also fascinated, Keshava, Gideon, by the number of young 16-year-old, 17, 18-year-old Indian batsmen who play the reverse sweep with such aplomb. You know, it is they're fearless. I mean, I think the one thing about the modern day batsman, and I think that's the positive that T20 has done, in a way has brought a level of fearlessness to the sport, to the way they play the game. I mean, you know, you've got prototype AB de Villiers all over Indian team, in several of our young Indian cricketers. They're staggeringly good, and they hit the ball hard. My only worry is, will they, you know, maybe I'm being a romantic here, but the 70s, you know, Sunil Gavaskar wearing down the opposition on a tough wicket in in a test match in the West Indies, or at Bangalore, that great innings that he played against Qasim and Qadir in his last test. I mean, will we produce those kind of batsmen anymore? I don't know. I mean, the jury is out. I guess the nature of batsmanship has changed, so maybe I'm being a bit unfair. But I worry at times that will T20 completely sort of change the rules of the game to the point where the nature of Test cricket for the young Indian cricketer becomes not irrelevant, but certainly not as important as scoring a match-winning IPL innings.
The thing is that you've got such massive riches, though. You can afford to be wasteful with them. I was very impressed a couple of years ago, when India called up Mayank Agarwal out of domestic cricket and dropped him straight into a Boxing Day Test match. He had no previous experience of Australian conditions. He dropped straight in and looked the part straight away. Technically very proficient, very patient, knew how to organise innings. And I've watched him over the last couple of years massively expand his game. I mean, he's hugely gifted. That's a great advertisement for the Indian domestic cricket scene, that you can produce ready-made players like that and put them into international competition, and there doesn't seem to be any noticeable step up. So kudos to you from that point of view.
I've been following Mayank's, he's also from Bangalore since he was playing in school, and he was seen as a T20 specialist when he started. I mean, he was seen as a new saver. And in the Ranji Trophy, he was able to refine his game playing for Karnataka and arrive in the MCG and know where his off-stump was and have great discipline, as you said.
But let me give the flip side of another Bangalore boy, Keshava, which is KL Rahul. Yeah. When I first saw him, I saw him as a 10,000 plus test cricketer, in the Rahul Dravid League. That kind of a player. He uses class even today when you watch him back. Yeah. But I somewhere fear that he's had no time to work on his game. You see, I think one of the things that hopefully COVID does is, if there is less cricket, in terms of not every week playing the game, you can actually have time to sit in the nets or at home and work at your game. I don't think young cricketers get that opportunity at times. And I think Rahul suffered a bit as a result, because certain bad habits crept in, which will creep in if you play T20 all the time. So I think he's the other example. Mayank Agarwal is a good example of someone who spent, what did he spend, about 8-10 years playing for Karnataka before he was picked for India. I think that makes a huge difference. So he was picked in his latter half of his 20s. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating my fears here, because Gideon is right. The quality of riches in Indian cricket is incredible. You see them all coming in from small towns, the so-called Dhonification of Indian cricket, which I think is the real phenomenon of our times. 1971, India beats England in England and the West Indies. In England, we had, out of the 11, 6 players were from Mumbai. By today, you will have 1 or 2 from Mumbai and the rest from all over the country. I think that is the real story of Indian cricket, that I don't think, and the reason why Indian cricket is number 1 today. I think the moment we broke the metropolitan monopoly, I think we became number 1.
I should just quickly say on that.
I've got a question for both of you, though. Has a bifurcation opened up between batting and bowling? Are the riches now reserved for the batsman, the prestige reserved for the batsman? You spoke before about Natarajan, having come from his chapati stall and made a living out of cricket. But he's a death bowler, and death bowlers seem to have relatively short lives. It doesn't take long for batsmen to work them out. They probably have 2 or 3 years where they're really effective, and then they're kind of discarded. Do you foresee the time coming where everyone aspires to be a batsman, because that's the smart vocational choice? And bowling is not the kind of area where you can carve out a long-term career, where you have, of course, the risk of injury at the same time. You have the vicissitudes of selection. I'm just wondering whether we've created a kind of a 2-speed economy where the riches will naturally accrue to batsmen rather than to bowlers.
Keshava?
I mean, I think Indian cricket has always had that bias, right? It's a natural thing. The biggest stars, Sachin, Kohli, etc. I just want to say one thing quickly on actually, because Rajdeep mentioned the 70-71, and of course, Rajdeep's father, your father, was top scorer in both those Test victories. Both at the Oval and at Port of Spain, right? Because he got 100 at Port of Spain, and I think he was the only guy to get 50 at the.
That's right. I think Engineer also got a 50 at the Oval, and maybe Solkar also. But you're right, he got 100 in the one that we won in the West Indies, and a 50 in England. Yeah.
Yeah, but certainly, yeah, I mean, I think the riches of Indian cricket have always been for batsmen. Okay, so we're almost out of time. I want to ask each of you a couple of quick ones before we end. And so the first is I want to ask you to pick how you think the IPL is going to go. Who do you see winning? Rajdeep, you want to go first?
Look, I want a new team to win. I like the idea that the IPL is not like the English Premier League, where the battle is fought between the top 3 or 4 teams every year in football. I'd like to see, having lived in Delhi 25 years and the city has been good to me, I would like to see the Delhi Capitals win. I would like to see your home city, Royal Challengers Bangalore, because I sense that they are the one franchise which seems to have this frenzied support for it. I don't think and that's part of the game, right? That your generation, Keshava, if I may say so, is unlikely to go and watch a Karnataka versus Mumbai final at the Chinnaswamy. But you can bet your top dollar that if there was an IPL final with RCB, they'd all be there. So I'm going for either RCB or Delhi Capitals, 2 teams that haven't won the trophy that are in the last 4.
I think it's important that there's one team that never wins, because you want the romance, the never-ending quest for the Grail. And if it has to be anyone, I think it should be RCB, because they've just had so many advantages. They've had such a talented squad for so long, and somehow they can't crack it. I'd actually, just for the sake of variety, I'll say Sunrisers. I actually really like the Sunrisers as a team. I really like the fact that that they've come home with a wet sail. Warner's played with so compellingly. I've actually found that the IPL quite compelling to watch this summer, or this winter, or whatever season it is that we're calling it. And
can I just add a small line to your point on Warner? I mean, look at the fascinating aspect. Here is someone who's seen otherwise as the bad boy in the way of Australian cricket, but embraced by Sunrisers Hyderabad and actually seems to revel in captaincy of Sunrisers Hyderabad, like few other international captains have of an Indian franchise. I speaking to VVS Lakshman a few months ago, he said Warner was actually looking forward to the idea of captaining Sunrisers. It's given him a sort of new lease of life, not just now, but over the last few years, remarkably successful. And, the Hyderabadis have really warmed to him. So I think that's, again, a barrier that's been broken. The fact that you now get to see these Indian cricketers, these Australians in flesh and blood playing for an Indian franchise. I think all the barriers that existed, the distance between Australia and India, the tyranny of distance.
I think we've lost.
Rajdeep momentarily.
But I will say from the point of view of Warner, a very shrewd Australian cricketer, a very shrewd teammate of Warner's once said to me that Warner made a much better captain than he did a vice captain. He didn't have enough to do, and he tended to focus his aggression on the opposition. When he was captain, he enjoyed a natural authority, and he tended to look after his own teammates.
That's interesting.
He might end up being one of the best Australian captains that never led his country.
Along with
like your old friend Shane Warne.
Indeed, Warne and Warner.
One very final one. Just put you on the spot. Predictions for the Test series, Gideon. How do you think India can win?
I do think that Australia will start favourite. I think over the last couple of years they've played some pretty good cricket. I think under Payne they've become a pretty resourceful outfit. It was a hugely impressive feat for India to win here 2 years ago. Even when Smith and Warner were absent, Australian conditions are a massive advantage to us. There's no two ways about it. I think Australia starts favourite, and I think Kohli will have to make more runs than he did here 2 years ago. I think he's going to be a much more important wicket. Can I see Pujara doing the same as he did 2 years ago? That was such an astonishing series that he played. The stars really aligned in India's favour. Certain key players probably outperformed their own expectations. Can they double up? Well, they'll want to against an Australia that includes Smith and Warner.
I think the key actually lies in 2 people who've not played the IPL. One is Pujara, who's the sort of refreshing contrast to all else you see around you in this age of sort of, big bats and hitting the ball for sixes all the time. And the other from the Australian side is Manas Labuschagne,
Yeah.
Who from the very first time I saw him, and I sort of occasionally get it right, I thought he had class in him. And I see him getting better and better. If he gets runs for Australia, that will reduce the pressure on Warner and Smith to produce. And I think that will give the Australians the edge. If Pujara is able to have a series anywhere close to what he had a couple of years ago, I think that will reduce the pressure on Kohli to sort of deliver all the time. Therefore, I'm going for a 2-2. I think the best two teams of the world, it's a bit like Frazier versus Muhammad Ali, 15 rounds. You don't want to choose a winner.
Yeah, I have to say, in the 30th time I've been watching cricket, I've never.
What's your prediction?
At the time I've been watching cricket, I don't think I've ever seen a batsman as good as Steve Smith. I think when we look back at the end of his career, I think he's going to be second to Bradman, certainly in Test cricket. Nobody knows how to get him out, you bowl to his pads, goes to mid wicket for four. He's such a unique. He's almost like a Muralitharan of batting, right? In that sense.
Can I just add to that? If my old coach Vasant Amladi in Mumbai had seen Steve Smith bat, he would have sent him out and told him, come back again when you've got your technique right. Yeah. I think Steve Smith is again a wonderful sort of reminder that you can play the same game in 100 different ways. There are 9 ways to skin a cat, and the one thing he knows is how to score runs, and that is a remarkable gift to have, to be able to know how to score runs. So he versus Kohli will be a big battle.
You see, Australia have added Lavishay and they've got Warner back. So I see Australia winning 2-1 or 3-1, but we'll see. Anyway, so we could keep going, but it's always lovely to talk cricket with you guys. And thank you, Gideon. Thank you, Rajdeep.
Thank you, Rajdeep Sardesai, Gideon Haigh, and Keshava for that absolutely brilliant session. Looking forward to the India-Australia tour, and good to know that cricket has broken every boundary of class, caste, the divide between urban and semi-urban, and of course, religion, and more importantly, has brought two nations together, Australia and India. Thank you all very much. Really, many apologies for not taking any questions in this session. It was really brilliant, and we didn't want to interrupt them. They were in full flow. They could have carried on till the series actually started in Australia. But thank you all for watching, and please do remember to log back tomorrow, Saturday, 7th of November at 7:30 p.m. IST for the JLF Voices of Faith series, the Ramcharitmanas, then and now, Pavan K. Verma and Pragya Tiwari in conversation. Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas has highlighted Lord Ram's immense faith and belief in the concept of dharma, the ideas of the utopian society that Lord Ram strove for within these verses has since then generated the notion of Ram Rajya. Pragya Tiwari and Pavan K. Verma together discuss the foundations of Ram Rajya, what it signifies, and its enduring place in Indian polity. Also a reminder to block your dates for JLF North America, which will star Nobel laureates, Man Booker and Pulitzer Prize winners Eric Cornell, Yen Martel, Homi Bhabha, Michael Sandel, William Caleb, McDaniel, Vijay Shashadri, Stephen Greenblatt, Amish Tripathi, Ira Makhoti, and so many other speakers to discuss issues including the ongoing United States of America elections, the Black Lives Matter, environment, history, science, travel, nation and identity, fiction, and poetry. We start with JLF Colorado, 8th to the 11th and 15th to the 18th of November. We move on to JLF Houston, 21st to the 22nd November, and on to JLF New York, 23rd and 24th of November, and we conclude JLF Toronto, 27th to the 29th November. So do block your dates. Until we see you tomorrow, stay safe, stay masked. Thank you.